It has been 8 months since the release of the original Family Basic cartridge, and now Nintendo has a whole new version. To answer the obvious question of where version 2 has gone, it's actually the most common version of Family Basic. 1.0 was for an exceptionally rare Famicom variant that Sharp released. So the cartridge copies that were released for the regular family computer were version 2. I went over a lot of the technical details and background in the original Family Basic video, so I'll keep it quick here. BASIC is a programming language that throughout the 70s, 80s, and even into the 90s was used as an introductory programming language. And as a result, a version of BASIC came with virtually every computer out there. Version 3 of Family Basic was released as a standalone cartridge, which meant you had to have the keyboard that you got with the previous version of Family Basic in order to use it. A key feature of Family Basic as a programming language is a lot of built-in routines for handling sprites, music, and gamepad input. What is new in Family Basic 3? Well, top of the list is that they expanded the amount of memory available for users. We've gone from 2K of memory available for your programs to 4K. That's an absurdly small amount of space, but it's still double what they had before. There's also a lot of improvements to the editor. A command to trace what line number you're at as you execute. One that easily lets you slip back and forth between the background graphics edit mode and the program edit mode. And even commands to find strings in your program. They also extended the functionality of the memory interface commands, which hobbyists took advantage of to write directly to the Famicom's memory and create much more complex games. Family Basic was the start of a lot of developers' careers in Japan, and there's a network of enthusiasts out there still making games for it to this day. Obviously, with the extended functions, Family Basic version 3 is the preferred cartridge. To get users started, there are 4 games included on the cartridge that are accessed through a basic command, game and then a number, and this number goes from 0 to 3. Game 0 isn't really interactive. It just draws a heart on the screen and then fills it in. Game 1 has the player controlling a penguin on a grid, and your goal is to collect all of the numbers in sequential order. I know that looks like 16 on that line, but it's really 1, then 6. This is a good point to bring up here, but all of these games respond very slowly to your inputs. The way that Family Basic pulls inputs is that it only checks when it runs that line of code. And the code executes very slowly, which means that everything feels stiff and unresponsive. It's important to remember that these games are programming exercises, not really something that you'd pop in and have a lot of fun with. Game 2 is a Lode Runner-esque platforming maze, but it has the same collect sequential numbers theme that Game 1 had. You can also collect the apples for extra points. And the things that look like barrels are springs that will shoot you up to the level above them if you stop on that space for a moment. The final game built into the cartridge, Game 3, is Star Killer, a Space Wars or Asteroids-esque shooting game. There are 2 ships, and the second one can be controlled by the computer or a second player. You rotate your ships by pressing left and right, and give it thrust by pressing up. Your goal, of course, is to shoot down more of the targets than your opponent. Or you could just shoot your opponent. But what if you wanted more sample programs than just those 4? Well, Hudson released cassettes with programs written in Family Basic. And you could load these off of any cassette recorder, not just the Famicom data recorder. As long as it had a headphone jack, you could run a wire between it and the Famicom keyboard. In fact, I'm loading these cassettes off an old Radio Shack Walkman clone. Lode Runner World was a double cassette release where one cassette was an expansion for the Famicom version of Lode Runner that had 100 new levels, and the other cassette were 10 games. 5 could be played on the original Family Basic cartridge, but 5 required version 3. Naturally, I'm going to briefly go over all 10. The process of loading a game from cassette is not as straightforward as you might expect. Family Basic saves graphics data and program data separately, so you have to go to the graphics editor and then choose to load. If you know the program you're looking for on the cassette, you can just type that name in and let it run through the cassette until it finds it. But if you leave it blank, then it'll just load the first thing it finds. Once it's loading, then you hit play on the cassette player, and then you wait. When the graphics are finally loaded, you exit back to program mode, and then load again. On all of the official Famicom Basic cassettes, the software is stored with all of the graphical data first, and then the basic program code second. The first game on the Lode Runner World cassette is Bingo 25, a game where unfortunately the magnetic media was a bit corrupted in my copy. But I think the gist of it is, you have a card with the numbers 1 through 25 on it randomly arranged, and so does your opponent, and you take turns guessing numbers, trying to avoid completing a bingo for the other player. The next game is Space Attacker, which is the most impressive game on the cassette. You're controlling a turret, and your goal is to line up shots with the ships that are coming down. But your shots are slow, and your viewpoint doesn't actually change, so you're trying to steer the flying saucers that are doing a random walk generally downward into your crosshair. You have energy that gets used up when you shoot, and you lose more of it if the ship reaches the bottom of the screen. I just wish that the energy pool wasn't so large, though you could always edit the program, I guess. The next game is Kata Ball, and I have a bit of graphics corruption again, but it's still pretty playable here. Your goal is to hit the bouncing balls until they fly off the top of the screen. Hit them twice and they evolve into their next form, which bounces higher, and if they bounce twice without you hitting them, then they devolve into a form that bounces lower. This wouldn't be so bad if the controls weren't so stiff. Next up is Barricade, which is just a classic snake game, although here there isn't another snake or any targets for you to gobble up, so it's kind of dry. The final game on Side A is Scramble. Sadly, not that one. You need to collide your ship with the fireballs that are coming down before they reach the bottom of the screen, and they'll destroy the platforms if they hit them. Run out of platforms and it's game over. So, closer to Missile Command than Scramble, really. Over to Side B, where the games written specifically for Family Basic version 3 are. First up is Biotech, a bit of a confusing arcade game where you have to neutralize the monsters that are roaming around the tube, and then once they're in a safe state, pick them up and carry them over to the container. I found it kind of difficult to not accidentally change a monster from being safe to hostile again. It was just that the controls were kind of unresponsive. The next game doesn't have a graphics load. It's called The Puzzle, and it's just a sliding block puzzle. Only you're sliding numbers instead of a picture, so it's even less exciting. The third game also doesn't require a graphics load. It's called Slalom. Not that slalom. And here your goal is to just stay on the track, so you're not even really slaloming. You're on a timer for this one, and you lose points if you go off. Hot Pen Pen is a maze chase game where you're trying to collect the flag and avoid the monster. One thing you're going to notice as you're playing is that the monster speeds up a lot when you're not moving. That's because the routine to move your penguin is just so slow. The final game on here is Drill Tank, an arcadish game with some really obvious inspiration, where your goal is to defeat all of the fire-breathing turtles on each stage. I don't know why you have to drill through the soil in this game, it doesn't add anything. Those were the 10 games on the Lode Runner World cassette, but before I wrap up, I want to show off a current Family Basic program. I got this program from the channel Masando Vision, a YouTuber who recreates cassette vision games in Family Basic. I had to take about an hour to type it in myself since he's not finished with it yet, but this is a port of Kikori no Yosaku, which was Epoch's unlicensed port of SNK's first arcade game, which was also just called Yosaku. You're a woodcutter trying to chop down both trees on the stage while avoiding the enemies that are coming at you. The death routines haven't been implemented yet in the game, but it's still neat to see something like this built in Family Basic. I can't say that many people would want to go back to Family Basic version 3, or even try to play the games that were made in it. But Family Basic is an important part of the Famicom's legacy. It's the computer part of the family computer. Tinkering with Family Basic has made me appreciate that these days, if you want to make a game for the Famicom, there are some high-quality tools out there for you.